Welcome to Tales of Resilience, a podcast honoring the heart behind animal rescue. I'm your host, Jolene Feeney, a mental health therapist, lifelong animal lover, and founder of PAWS and Animal Rescue Hub. This is a space for real conversations with the people who care for animals when no one else can. From shelter teams and wildlife rehabbers to transporters, vet techs, and nonprofit leaders. We talk about the joy, the grief, the burnout, and the moments that remind us why we keep showing up. Whether you've lived this work or just want to understand it more deeply, thank you for listening. Let's get into today's story. This episode may include references of animal suffering and death, as well as themes of mental health, including suicide. Welcome to Tales of Resilience. I'm your host, Jolene, and I am very excited for today on Tales of Resilience to be joined by someone whose career has shaped the landscape of animal care, conservation, and nonprofit leadership for more than 2 decades. Harrison Edell is the CEO of PAWS in Seattle, Washington, an organization rooted in compassion, dedication to helping cats, dogs, and wild animals heal, and ultimately find their way home, whether that's a living room or a forest. Harrison is a visionary leader known for bringing strategic clarity and deeply humane solution-oriented approaches to every organization he touches. Before joining PAWS, he served as the Chief Mission Officer at the Dallas Zoo, where he led teams across animal care, education, conservation, and operations. His path also includes work at the California Raptor Center with UC Davis, and more than 20 years serving at major institutions, including the San Francisco, San Diego, Sacramento, and Dallas Zoo. Throughout his career, Harrison has championed collaborative teams, elevated animal welfare standards, and led transformational growth across nonprofit and conservation organizations. He's especially passionate about building inclusive communities and strengthening mission-driven work in ways that truly last. And of course, when he's not leading PAWS into its next chapter, you'll find him at home in the Seattle area with his 2 senior rescue pups. Harrison, so grateful to have you here today, and welcome to Tales of Resilience.
Thanks, Jolene. I'm blushing from the intro. That's a lot.
Well, it sounds like you've been up to a lot, so I think it's a well-deserved introduction.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, we have a lot to kind of go over today in our podcast, but I really like to start with just kind of getting an introduction to PAWS, certainly, and then we'll kind of talk about your evolution into that organization, into the animal welfare space. So what can you tell us about PAWS?
Yeah. PAWS has been around a long time. We've been around since the late 60s, 1966. We were founded very much as a grassroots organization that started out dedicated to finding homes for companion animals in need. And it really was a group of individuals who coalesced around the need and found creative ways to support animals and built from there. And so what originated as a group that was really focused on finding homes for companion animals that needed support, strays and abandoned animals, grew over time, kind of organically. And so at our campus in Linwood, which is our original site, we have an 8-acre campus here that was originally sort of designed with companion animals in mind, but it also served as home for our wildlife facilities for a number of years. We started to work with wildlife in a rehabilitation setting decades ago, and that program grew in its own right to the point that we opened last year the largest wildlife rehabilitation facility in Washington State at our second campus in Snohomish, which is a little bit northeast of us here in Linwood. So we not only continue to serve companion animals, dogs and cats in need, but we also are working with wild animals at this point, ranging from hummingbirds to black bears and everything in between. And then we've also got a third campus that we established down in the U District in Seattle. Cat City is cat focused only, and it serves as an adoption hub, but also a community outreach facility and an education hub. And so a good proportion of the cats that we find homes for each year are finding homes through Cat City. So that's been an incredibly useful sort of outreach tool for us. And so spread between those three campuses, we have some really dedicated teams, incredibly passionate and skilled people who are working day in and day out to support the animals while they're here, to stabilize and treat animals in need, whether that's a medical issue or a behavioral issue. Um, we have teams that play matchmaker who literally find the right animal to go home with a family or an individual. We have a biologist on our wildlife team who, a huge part of his work is scouting locations and finding the right habitats for wild animals to go back to the wild. And then we've got an incredible support team back of house who are fundraising and working closely with volunteers and staff to do all sorts of things. We do have a sort of fledgling education program here. We run camps at our Linwood facility for kids who are interested in wildlife and animals. And so we've got a lot of different irons in the fire, all of which are helping to make a difference for animals, both individual animals in need, but also on a grander scale, trying to make sure we practice what we preach and that we're building empathy, building opportunities for kids so that they grow up caring more about animals as an adult.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I mean, you guys are tackling so much, and it obviously the dedication to the animals shows, and the ability to exist for such a long time and to have such growth and the ability to expand services and continue to teach, which is amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm very proud of the impact we have. We treat between 4 and 5,000 wild animals each year, and we find homes for between 3 and 4,000 companion animals each year. So, on an individual level, we are dealing with, we have our hands on and are interacting with a lot of animals in any given year. But I'm also proud of the fact that so much of the work we do is community focused. It doesn't do any good if we support the animal and then hand it back to a community that isn't better off or isn't prepared to receive that animal or care for it. So I do appreciate that we have sort of a multidisciplinary approach to try to make the world a safer, better place for the animals themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that that's thankfully a common thread in many of the conversations that I've been having is that uh, you have to include the people and the community in this work if you want it to be successful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's easy to find short-term solutions, but if you're trying to make a long-term solution, you have to engage the communities around you. Otherwise, things don't change. And ideally, if we do this the right way, we're putting ourselves out of business. I would love for us not to need to be around in a decade or 20 or 50 years. I'm not sure if that's the way things are actually going, but we're trying our best.
Absolutely. Well, it sounds like you guys are definitely trying your best and doing as much of your part as you can. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about yourself, Harrison. Like I know that you started your love for animals very young. So how did you tell me about your path?
Sure. Yeah, I joked with you before we were live. I told my parents when I was 4 or 5 years old that I wanted to work with animals as a grown up. And I think they hoped I would grow out of it, and I didn't, and here we are. So um, I I felt lucky in my youth because I kind of knew what I wanted to do. I had a direction. I remember being an undergrad and having lots of friends that were not sure what they wanted to do after college. So picking a major was very stressful. I knew what I wanted to do, so I had it easy. I went to University of California at Davis to pursue degrees in animal behavior and reproductive physiology with the goal of working with animals after undergrad. Ended up working originally, my first jobs in wildlife were in education. It was teaching. I was teaching kids in classrooms, teaching kids informally out in the world and in zoo and aquarium settings. And so finding ways to take complex ideas or concepts and interpret them in 5 different ways to help it resonate with a group of kids were some of my earliest experiences in wildlife and in husbandry and in welfare. Uh, And then I ended up moving into sort of an animal management role, overseeing animal care teams in zoos. And so, again, working with frontline staff who were the hands-on, individuals that were working directly with live animals, meant not only did I need to sort of know my stuff on my own, but it also meant that I needed to be able to coach and work with teams to help them troubleshoot and problem solve. One of the things that is a constant, right? One of the reasons that producers in Hollywood don't love working with animals or kids is because animals and kids keep us on our toes. They're not always consistent. They always surprise us. And so we have to sort of build in a level of adaptability into our routine. Things don't always go as planned. And you're working with living creatures who are reacting to the world around them. And so um, learning to think on my feet early in working with frontline animal care staff and working side by side with them. There were some really important lessons early on about that. And I was really lucky in my career in zoos and aquariums to work in a lot of accredited facilities that put conservation and education at the forefront. These were not places where we were doing things for profit. These were places where the animals that I was caring for um, were producing offspring that went back to the wild. So we had to really prepare them to live in the wild. And there was a mission to it as opposed to just going in and sort of interacting with an animal and hoping things turned out okay.
Yeah.
Um, so I think for me, mission has always been forefront. It's always been a question of why are we doing this and how do we really make our work meaningful. And so most recently at Dallas Zoo, I had the best job at the zoo because I did get to work with the animal care teams. I got to work with conservation teams that were coordinating work out in the field that was incredibly meaningful. And then I also got to work with our education teams and our volunteer teams to bring those stories home and make them meaningful to guests and teams. And so that was an incredible opportunity. And all of that sort of led me to PAWS.
Hmm.
I ended up here in the Pacific Northwest. It's this upper left corner of the US is an incredible place to be. And I found PAWS, and PAWS is uh, similar in a lot of regards, different in a few ways. And I've joked with our teams here that I feel like I'm speaking the same language that I spoke in zoo and aquarium fields, but it's a different dialect. So, so instead of building a decade-long relationship with an individual animal that is part of a conservation breeding program, and we know that animal individually, at PAWS, whether it's a companion animal or wild animal, we almost act as an emergency room.
Mhm.
We receive a wild animal in that is in rough shape. We assess it, we stabilize, we triage, and then we support it as it's recovering, and then we get it out back into the world as soon as we possibly can. On the shelter side, we receive an animal that's in rough shape. Oftentimes, we assess it, we triage, we stabilize it medically, behaviorally, and then we find ways to get it back out into a long-term environment as soon as we possibly can. And so for me, there are some differences, obviously, between zoo and aquarium world and shelter and rehab world, but there are enough similarities that I can use the language I know just in different context. And so it's been a really very cool time at PAWS, getting to know the team and getting to know the work that we're doing here, and getting involved and engaged in a new setting.
Yeah,
So.
absolutely. Yeah, I was curious what that translation is from zoos and aquariums to kind of more of this rescue space. And so obviously you're touching on that, but were there other learning curves? I mean, you've obviously had to probably learn a lot throughout your variety of experiences, but
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, there's always things to learn, right? Uh, but I think some of the common threads that connect animal-focused people are present in all of those different environments. I think sometimes we work too hard to find the differences in things. And I would say, in the world that we live in, IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature, just had their recent meetings where they reevaluated species to really understand which species are endangered, which ones are recovering, how is every species doing. And every time they meet, the number of endangered species seems to creep up.
Mm,
It doesn't come down. There is too much at stake in the world of conservation, for us to focus on differences. I think, we're at the point where things are getting really desperate in the world of conservation, and that affects education and empathy building, so that we're creating a population, a generation of people who care enough about animals to change their behavior. But it also applies to the hands-on work. Um, and I think there's just too much at stake for us to focus on differences. Similarities. Animal welfare is welfare. There are certain ways that you study and measure it and understand it. And whether I'm focused on a domestic cat who just came in off the streets, who we're trying to understand, versus a wild tiger that's living in Sumatra, welfare is welfare. There are certain indicators that are unique to the species, but they are ubiquitous across all of the cats. There are certain things behaviorally that we would look at to understand welfare. And so I think for me, the learning curve is steep, obviously, because it's a change in venue, but there are enough sort of commonalities and common threads to be able to link previous experience. And for me, the light bulb moments have been these moments where I realize, oh, wait, no, there are lots of organizations that are doing exactly that thing. We just need to get in touch with them instead of recreating the wheel, and understand this thing using what we already know. And sometimes looking outside of our immediate circle to look at partners and ask partners, how would you do this? How have you been doing this? So it's maybe a little bit less about the steep learning curve, and it's more about
mm.
finding the right ways to connect the dots to put our teams in touch with folks who have done some of the same things before.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's a beautifully worded sentiment around, focusing on the similarities and not differences, and also that power of collaboration, and not feeling like you said, have to reinvent the wheel, and
Mhm.
know that the hive mind is greater than, us working alone.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Um, would you mind talking a little bit about, I know you had shared in kind of the paperwork ahead of time about the difference between rescue and conservation, but also like how they're actually in the same vein of like similarities. Like, can you talk about conservation just so people who maybe aren't as familiar with what that means can understand that?
Absolutely. That is one of the big shifts for me. I think when we're looking at things in a conservation lens, we're looking at an entire species. What are the trends that we see for the species? Where are the pinch points? Where are problematic points? What are the strategies to focus on making the population more sustainable into the future? Rescue tends to be more individually focused. It's more about, here is an animal or a group of individual animals that we need to stabilize and understand. And there's clearly overlap in this giant Venn diagram, right? There are some species that are both endangered and we're supporting individuals. And then there are other aspects of conservation where the rescue realm may not touch that part of conservation. And then there are also aspects of rescue where conservation doesn't necessarily overlap. But at the same time, all of the work is important. It just is. If we are rehabilitating a songbird that is not a critically endangered species of songbird, that individual animal still has value. It has an intrinsic value, has an ecological value, and I think in some ways there's a cultural value. So when a finder, which is what we call the person who brings the animal to us, brings us a songbird that hit a window, or a songbird that my cat brought inside, and they feel beside themselves because this poor little life is struggling. Our team at the Wildlife Center are often, whether it's on the phone or in person, the first point of contact for that individual. That individual means well, wants well. They're on the same page. They share the same values that we do, and so for them to go out of their way to go to work late, to pay for the gas to get here, to go to the work, to grab this poor little wild beast that is struggling and bring it to us is an investment of their time and energy. But I think for us, it's also an incredible opportunity to talk about what it means to coexist with animals, what it means to share our habitat and our lives and our environment with other living things. And and ultimately, conservation isn't about it is about saving animals, but it is also very much about behavior change. If if I can make subtle changes in my individual behavior that benefit the environment around me, that is conservation. We're just trying to figure out, I think, how do we make those small changes meaningful and replicate them enough times that we see big cultural change. So I think even though that individual songbird isn't of an endangered species, that connection we have with a family who brought this animal in, the opportunity to bring volunteers and interns and other community members out to the wild when we put an animal back into its habitat, there is so much opportunity there to, I don't want to say leverage, but I'm going to say leverage that individual animal's life to impact on a broader scale. And I think, a red-tailed hawk, or North American river otter, a porcupine, like these animals are not members of critically endangered species, but they're animals that resonate with us. People see an otter and are drawn to it. It's a fascinating little animal. They're intelligent, they're clever, they're problem solvers. There are so many cool things that connect us to that animal. So for us in the rehabilitation and the rescue realm, when we're talking about wildlife, those animals become incredible ambassadors for us to storytell and to talk about what it's like to be an otter living in this wetland habitat. How does that wetland habitat interact with a larger water system, and how do we in a kayak or on a walk next to that wetland, how do we interact with that space and with that animal? So there's some really, really cool connections there to be made between individual rescue and a broader conservation philosophy or ethos. And I think I'd say the same about shelters. Obviously, dogs and cats are not endangered. There are a lot of dogs and cats in the world, but especially when we talk about education and kids, more Americans live in urban areas than rural areas. And that shift happened not that long ago, in the last 10 or 20 years. 30, 50 years ago, more people lived in rural areas. So people who grew up in rural areas grew up hearing owls at night in the backyard and probably played in a creek and watched frogs metamorph. And, there's all of these cool interactions with nature. In today's world, more Americans are living in cities. I don't think that it's going to swing back the other direction. I mean, we don't see a lot of Americans deciding, I'm ditching the city life where it's convenient, and I'm going to go live in the woods. It's just not likely to happen. So for me, looking to the future, the question is, how does this next generation grow up? Do they grow up ever having interacted with honest to God wildlife, or are the only animals they're ever going to interact with dogs, cats, and pigeons? So I think we need to figure out what the opportunities are there to build those connections when we have those opportunities between urban kids and animals, whether that's a dog or a cat or a red-tailed hawk that's going back into the wild in the suburbs somewhere. And so when we talk about finding homes for dogs and cats, for me, the big picture here is that we are trying hard to sort of educate prospective pet owners, find homes for the individual animal, but also build a more empathetic future generation so that 10 years, 20 years from now, when kids are growing up to be consumers who choose how to spend their money, when they're voting, how are they voting? I'm hoping they're voting thinking about their impact on the world around them. I'm hoping that they're voting thinking about the animals that we share our lives and our environment with. Because if we don't find ways to connect them now, it's really hard to imagine that they're going to vote with animals in mind in 20 years or 30 years. It's hard to imagine that they're going to be conscientious consumers when it's time to use their money to support rainforest safe products or recycled products over brand new plastics. So I think, there are some really interesting connections in this relationship between conservation and rescue.
Yeah, I appreciate that kind of breakdown of, it's like a web. It seems like it just
Yeah,
branches out and touches so many things. And, you know, that behavioral change that you're talking about has to come through education and people, like you said, kind of seeing the story and seeing their relationship to the story.
absolutely.
Yeah.
You asked earlier about past career positions and what have I done in the past that led me here. One of my early jobs in education at San Francisco Zoo was a grant-funded program that brought non-releasable animals, a lot of whom were former pets that had been surrendered to the zoo or confiscated and ended up at the zoo. And these were animals that were not going to thrive in the wild,
Mhm.
but which were already sort of comfortable around humans. And those animals became incredible ambassadors for us to connect with people, either at the zoo or offsite. Part of this grant-funded program allowed us to take some of those animals into classrooms in really rough neighborhoods in San
Mm.
Francisco. And I remember taking animals like ball pythons, snakes into classrooms, having an entire classroom of 20 or 30 teenagers who lost their mind, terrified of this animal, and being able to get a couple of them to come interact and engage, and getting one or two of them that were brave enough to actually touch the back of a snake and realize it isn't slimy, this isn't what I imagined. And there are these connection moments, these light bulb moments where you can dispel one myth and it leads to dispelling another myth. And to have over the course of 30 minutes or an hour with a group of kids, to have them shift and to see a measurable shift in reaction to an animal from abject fear and uncertainty and concern all the way to curiosity and an interest in learning more and a willingness to question that maybe the things that I emotionally react to might actually not be valid. That alone to me felt so meaningful. And so I think, to your point, education is a huge part of it. We cannot assume that everyone is curious about animals.
Mhm.
Sometimes you got to get past some of those early hurdles
Yeah.
to give people the sort of cultural permission to be curious about this thing and learn more about it. But it all starts with that connection to a living thing. So
Yes.
finding ways to facilitate that are critical.
Yeah, when you were talking about, the kind of migration into more urban areas and maybe not having that direct connection to animals,
Yeah.
I think it makes a lot of sense sometimes that in the behaviors that we see when people who are probably very unfamiliar with natural types of habitats go into national parks and maybe
Yeah.
have inappropriate interactions with animals because there's not really an understanding about those animals. And that always confused me because I'm from Montana originally and
Huh. Yeah.
very familiar with all sorts of animals and boundaries with animals. But
Yes.
uh,
Yeah.
and I would see these videos pop up online. I'm like, what are you thinking? But
Yeah.
it
Why are
makes
you that
sense, right?
close to a moose? Why are
Yeah.
you
Oh
that close
gosh.
to a bison?
Yeah.
Do not touch the bison.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think we take for granted, those of us who spend as much time as we do with animals take for granted the
Mhm.
things that we know. I will never approach an adult bison in the wild because I know better. How does that person I'm seeing on TikTok not know better? Well, because a lot of people are not spending that time with animals that we do.
Yeah.
Um, Somebody's got to connect with them and help them understand what the right behavior is.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes unfortunately it puts the animal's life at risk because
Absolutely.
they don't have the boundaries. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, yeah, so I guess maybe a little bit of a branching off of that sentiment is like in the work that you guys are doing, what do you find are some common misconceptions that the general public have about either the work that you're doing or even the rescuing of wildlife in particular? I know that, like you said, a lot of people are really well intentioned when they want to help animals. Sometimes the interventions may not always be it feels like the right thing in the moment, but it might not be the right thing. So I'm just curious about some things that you kind of run into.
I think you hit the nail on the head with interventions. And I think sometimes it's hard to convey the complexity of the biology of some of the animals we work with. And I think, I can think of so many instances where well-intentioned folks found a fledgling owl or a nestling owl and brought it in and fed it processed meat products. And now the bird is a young adult, it's ready to fledge, and that's when they bring it to us. And we inherit an animal that's got soft bones and a total lack of calcium because it didn't get the mouse bones and the fur that mom would have been feeding it had it been raised by an owl. Um, it's really hard to describe or help folks to understand the behavioral implications of interactions that are not appropriate with wild animals. It is hard to look at a physically perfect animal and understand why it won't thrive in the wild when those of us who have spent perhaps more time with animals look at it and recognize behaviorally this animal is going to crash and burn as soon as I release it. It
Mhm.
doesn't know that it's an animal. It doesn't know how to interact. I'm setting it up to fail if I release it because it's not going to interact with the environment properly, and it's either going to starve or it's going to get beat up by another animal because it's not interacting properly. And so we do spend a lot of time on the phone with concerned community members who want to know what to do about a fledgling bird, an animal that was hit by a car, a young animal that wandered into the yard. What do we do with it? And some of the time, the best answer is don't touch it, observe it from a distance, and leave it alone. And getting people to really understand that we're not just making this up as we go. We're saying this from a place of decades of experience with that species and similar species. And so it is not inappropriate to leave it up to the experts. And I think sometimes, we talked about river otters earlier. River otters are adorable. They're hilarious. They're also
Yeah.
very dangerous animals if they're in the wrong
Mhm.
mood. And
Mhm.
so, well-meaning folks can do unintentional big damage to a wild animal or to themselves um, because they're going into it with all of the best intentions, but perhaps not all of the experience and the knowledge to back it up. And so I think that's one of the things that we encounter often that's tough. It's really tough. On the shelter side, I think there are some really big misconceptions about behavior. And our team just put together a fantastic blog post that we shared on our social media channels going into the holidays. Not that we're going to necessarily encourage people to go get a kitten for their cousin without talking to the cousin first, but also uh, shelter pets are have the potential to be incredible pets, but there are lots of folks out there who say, it's coming from an unknown background. I just feel funny about it. I would never get a shelter pet. I want a purebred, so I know exactly what I'm getting. There's a whole sort of nature versus nurture discussion that goes on here. Um, there are purebred dogs that turn out beautifully behaved. There are purebred dogs that turn out little monsters. There are shelter animals that turn out beautifully behaved. There are shelter animals that can be little monsters. So much of it has to do with the environment and the training and the interactions that we provide. And so I think we need to get people over this fear of the unknown background of this shelter animal.
Yes.
Again, we mentioned earlier, I share my home with two senior dogs now. I've for through my life, I've had lots of animals that came from rescue situations, and they've turned out wonderfully. It hasn't always been easy to get them to a place where they're ready to interact in the
Yeah.
best way possible, and some individuals take more work than others. but to paint with too broad a brushstroke and to say that shelter animals are a disaster waiting to happen isn't
Yeah.
accurate, and it's not fair to the animals. And so, I think there's some big misconceptions there about shelter pets and how suitable they are once they get home, once they are at home with you. What does that look like? What does that feel like? So
Yeah. Yeah, I always appreciate that sentiment because yeah, the shelter and rescue animals do, for whatever reason, get labeled with, damaged goods, I suppose, right? That are just gonna be more work than they're worth. And often, they're so grateful and loving, and they just are, yeah,
they just need the opportunity. They need a
yeah,
chance to settle in and to thrive.
yeah.
Mm.
Oh yeah, and you have to be patient. I know my rescue, when she was with us, it took her about 2 years to really get comfortable with my husband. I had her first, and then we integrated families, and it
Yeah.
took really 2 years for her to really settle into him, and but it was great
Absolutely.
afterwards.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad to hear
Yeah,
that.
me too.
As is he, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Perfect. Well, I appreciate you touching on those misconceptions, and it sounds like those are some valuable things to be able to kind of, hear for people to hear that, these animals all deserve chances, but in the wildlife perspective too, defer to the experts, reach out before you're intervening, so that that animal has the best chance at survival.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, you guys, as many rescue organizations do, probably see a lot of hard things. And I'm curious, you do have to have a certain level of resilience. That's why, we're ultimately talking in many capacities, is like trying to really understand what it takes to sustain yourself, sustain teams in this work.
Mhm.
Um, First, how would you personally define resilience, if you could define it?
Resilience, how do we define it? I think resilience is maybe hard for folks to wrap their heads around because it takes different forms. There is a physical aspect of resilience. There's an intellectual aspect of resilience. There's an emotional, psychological aspect of resilience. A lot of work with animals is physically hard.
Mm,
You're outdoors in the cold, you're lifting, you're pulling, you're hauling. It is physically hard work. And sometimes we don't give our bodies an opportunity to rest. And that ends up, resulting in injuries or resulting in early retirement because I physically can't keep up anymore. And I think there is there's a lot to be said for listening to our body and making sure that we are taking care of it properly. On a weekend, I do need to recover, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think mentally, resilience means keeping up with best practices. The world around us and our profession is evolving every year, and I think um, there are there are always best practices, but those best practices are going to change from 10 years ago, 5 years ago, last year. And if I am not sort of intellectually making a point of understanding how those best practices are evolving and changing, I may not be providing the best care to the animals around me. And I may be setting myself up to fail long term because I'm not creating enough time or space to be curious, to read, to catch up, to have conversations with colleagues, and to understand what the newest and most efficient and best way to do something might be. And then I think that psychological, emotional aspect is big. Um, First responders and veterans have been talking about PTSD for decades.
mhm,
I often compare both our wildlife center and our companion animal shelter to emergency rooms. We get animals in various stages. Some of them are in really rough shape, some of them are in better shape, but in all of those cases, there's an immediate triage, there's treatment and stabilization, and all of that requires us to make arguably life and death decisions every day. The same way that a veteran who is in warfare is making life or death decisions, the same way that first responders, whether it's law enforcement or fire department or paramedic, need to make decisions with all of the weight of those decisions and all of the pressure that comes with it. We do that all of the time. And so from an emotional standpoint, the same way that I described that intellectual curiosity and giving ourselves the space to explore and be curious, we also need to give ourselves the space to recover and recuperate emotionally. Um, a lot of folks in nonprofits, and especially folks in the animal realm, are workhorses. We are driven. We roll our sleeves up. We see a need, we get it done. There's something to be said for being tough enough to just get it done, and that's great. I am tougher than I look, just for you and I. That's just a given. But that's not an excuse to just plow through everything. Like at some point, you have to take the break. You have to find ways to process some of the really hard things we deal with. And even beyond the life or death decisions that we are responsible for, we are very often receiving animals that come from horrendous situations.
Mhm.
Um, I think about we had a case not that long ago. It's the first bird that I got to band when I started at PAWS, was a great horned owl that was going back to the wild and was ready to go after treatment. But this bird had been a fledgling that fell out of a nest, somehow encountered some chemical substance that looked kind of like oil. So it was brought to us as an oil contaminant bird. But when we did X-rays, we also found buckshot, and this bird had been shot and had interacted with oil and was just trying to fledge and be a bird. And I just remember at one point being sort of hit by this bird in its relatively short lifespan has already encountered a lot of really hard things. And I hate the fact that this is a world where that can all happen to one bird in such a short period of time. Um, if I don't create enough space to feel that and to process that, I am setting myself up for long-term collapse. I think I've got to create enough space and find whatever coping mechanism is meaningful to me to make sure that I am processing that appropriately. Um, because whether we feel it or not, when we pack too much of that emotion back and we ignore it or we don't process it, we like to think that we can plow through and focus on the work that we're doing. We're not. You're not. To folks out there who listen to this, if you believe that you've packed it away and you don't need to process it, and you are 100% when you're going into to treat the next case, you're not. There's some part of you that subconsciously is still wrestling with that thing. So for some people, that's art, and go and sit in front of a pottery wheel and throw some pots. For some people, it's go home and leash up your own dog and take it somewhere outdoors and go explore the woods and talk to your dog about how awful the day was. Some folks are lucky enough to have family or friends, the family you chose, who you can go and sit down with pasta and talk about the horrendous week and just share what it felt like. And those friends, those family, those spouses, those kids, whoever will sit and listen and be the feedback partner or the sponge that you need. And for some folks, it means really tapping out and saying, I need a professional. I want to talk to a
Mhm.
psychologist.
Yep.
And I think for far too long, there's been weird stigma around the psychologist. Mm, if I sat down with a veterinarian and I said, we've got a really weird case with a broken bone in an animal, are you open to calling an orthopedic surgeon and a specialist who knows about bones? That veterinarian will say, absolutely, call the specialist because they've got tools in their tool belt that I don't have, and I'm curious what they say. But I might talk to that same veterinarian and say, hey, listen, I know a therapist who's got some great tools that can help process emotion. Some of those same vets are saying, I'm going to pass. I
Mhm.
don't need it. And I think, okay, well, why is it that when we see another veterinary colleague who's got tools in the tool belt, we're open to it? But a therapist is really just somebody with tools in the tool belt that you might not have
Yeah.
who can connect you with those right tools. And so I think, the more we talk about this, I think the more willing people are to go find somebody who's a pro
Mhm.
and talk through some of the stuff that we go through, um, because it might be necessary. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right,
So
exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
well, appreciate the advocacy moment in
for sure.
that. Absolutely. And um, yeah, and I know you are using veterinarians as an example, but I think, sometimes just in that kind of first responder mentality, there is that just push through and, be strong and,
Mhm.
it is trying to pause, and just because you can doesn't mean you should. And, you know,
Absolutely. I
suffering
think some of
isn't a
the
requirement.
Yeah, some of the toughest jobs at PAWS are the frontline staff who are the first point of contact. We have customer service reps or client service reps here at the shelter who are the first person that local law enforcement connects with when they have picked up a stray dog that was hit by a car. At our wildlife center, some of our admission specialists who are the first person at the desk who are receiving the animal literally in hand, they're the ones who are maybe hit by some of the stories first, and they're not a veterinarian, so they might not be the one who's in the blood and the gore and trying to fix the bone for 6 weeks, but they're also just as emotionally impacted by the work that we do. So I think for all of us, it's important to take a beat and try and really find a way to self-assess and be honest about where we are emotionally, mentally, physically, on a regular basis.
Absolutely. Where do you feel like your resiliency comes from? Obviously, this is something you've built in yourself. How have you developed that over time?
Mhm. A lot of the examples I gave are examples that come from personal experience. I I was a potter for a long time. I love a good ceramic wheel. I can meditate quietly while throwing a pot on a wheel. I don't do it as much anymore, but maybe I should. Leashing a dog up, or maybe not with a dog, but just finding outdoor space to go hike and listen to the ocean makes a huge difference. It's extremely meditative to unplug, to not be social, but just to be alone with thoughts and feelings for a little bit is sometimes just what the doctor ordered. I do have incredible friends. I have a very supportive husband at home who is a great listener who will give feedback, or if I don't want feedback and I just want him to listen, he'll just sometimes sit with a cup of coffee and listen, which is fine. And I will also share freely. I've had great therapists in the past who are great sounding boards. And sometimes I am paying them just to listen, but oftentimes they notice things that I don't even notice in myself, and are able to make a suggestion. When you hit a roadblock like that, when you are feeling that feeling, let's try doing one of these three things and see if that's successful in recentering or regrounding or allowing you to focus again. And I thank them. I'm incredibly thankful for some of the tools that they've given me over the years to help me work through tough stuff. So.
Yeah, awesome. And what are your personal signals, if you feel open to sharing, that it's very important that you start intervening for yourself? Like, how do you
Mm,
know when you're kind of edging to a place of this might not be
mm,
so good?
Good question. I do feel a little on the spot, but this is in a good way. So we're going to do it. I think I am generally pretty cool, calm, and collected under pressure. In working with animals, we have to be adaptable. I worked with an incredible colleague years ago. Karen used to jokingly say, but it became a mantra: "Blessed are the adaptable." And we used to tell each other that all of the time. Um, in emergencies, in dealing with animals, I'm pretty cool most of the time. I will sometimes hear a sentence come out of my mouth and I think, oh wow, that didn't sound cool and calm and collected.
Mhm.
My patience is really short. This is coming. There's got to be some part of me that feels overwhelmed right now. I probably need to take a beat and either organize my thoughts by sitting down with a pad of paper and writing down all of the things that are weighing on me that I need to get done, in order to make it feel achievable and less overwhelming. Um, but I think for me, that shift in mood, that shift in tone is for me an instant recognition, or a point of recognition that something's off in my system. I'm not the even keeled individual that I aspire to be right now. So let's put a pause on this. Um, and I think I'm pretty attuned to my body too. Yeah, I recognize when I'm physically tired, and I take a break when I need to. And I think that just listening to my joints after 30 years of working with animals in various fields in various different contexts, my knees and my shoulders are not what they used to be. And so I think listening to my body, there are telltale signs that I'm physically tuckered out. I probably need to take a break today. I've been moving too much, in motion too much today, lifting too many things, doing too many things. And so listening to those squeaky joints, I think is a big trigger for me too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, especially with such physically demanding work. I mean, that, like you said, it seems like it has to be a must.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, Obviously, animals are great teachers in resilience. I think they demonstrate it in, greater capacities than we can even understand in many ways. I'm wondering if there's a particular animal or story or something that sticks out to you that really demonstrates resiliency.
Absolutely. I think of two examples. Um, when I was at San Francisco Zoo as a curator, one of our programs was focused on the recovery plan for bald eagles, and this was back in the day when bald eagles were still in bigger trouble than they are now. And we were home to 16 non-releasable bald eagles who were foster parents to young eagles that came out of the wild from eggs that were affected by DDT with rubbery shells.
Mm.
If you've never interacted with a raptor that thinks it's a human, they are the most terrifying birds you've ever met. And if you hand raise bald eagle babies, it's pretty hard to do it and have them turn out behaviorally normal. And so we became home to these 16 birds, 8 pairs of birds, who were incredible foster parents to these baby eagles. And then those baby eagles, those eaglets, once they fledged, went back to the wild, and it was an incredible partnership with California Department of Fish and Game, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and San Francisco Zoo for many years. And we released over 100 bald eagles to the wild that came through this program. But for me, I remember watching on closed circuit camera with some of these birds that had had really hard recoveries, losing a wing, losing an eye, really tough injuries in the wild, and who would not have made it in the wild, but who had grown up to become incredible parents who were contributing back to the recovery of their species, whether they knew that or not, whether they understood that impact or not. And I remember being struck by the fact that these animals had come from such a hard experience, but had turned out to be incredibly functional and behaviorally very intriguing birds, each with their own personalities that we got to know over time and were fantastic parents. Um, I think on a more personal level, I talk a lot about Kona. Kona was a pup of mine. I adopted her when she was pretty young, and she was a street dog. She was microchipped, but when the dog catchers called the number registered to the microchip, the family just kept hanging up the phone. They were not interested in taking this pup back. She was one of a litter of Ridgeback mixes. So she had a ridge, but she was definitely not 100% Ridgeback. And until she got a little older, I don't think we really knew what the other parent was. Turns out the other parent was probably a Leonberger, which is a very large dog. And so this little dog that I had gotten as a moderately sized pup grew out to be a 90 plus pound, very well mannered young lady. And so Kona, for the earliest days, was really terrified of people. She was a street dog. She did not have any interest in meeting strangers. She trusted me, and because we lived together, we had a fantastic relationship. But she definitely took her time when she met new people. She was the kind of dog that would sit back and sort of observe for a while. And the harder you tried to get her to like you, the less interested she was in interacting. But if you gave her space on her own terms, she would come and approach you. And she had an uncanny sense of knowing when a person, whether it was me or family or friends, needed contact. This sounds crazy, but she was hardwired to be a therapy dog. She and we didn't go down the official therapy dog route. We probably should have, because she would have been amazing. But a friend who had had a really hard week would come and plop down and be talking about this difficult week. And she would come and put her chin on their knee. And I don't know how she knew, but she did. And she was another animal that, I shared my life with. And I remember being struck again by the fact that she had come from really difficult circumstances and she found a way through it and she survived it and came out the other side this incredibly wise old soul wrapped in a dog body. And I learned so many lessons from her. And she lived to be just over 14 years old, which for a big dog is a very long life.
Yes.
And towards the end, I remember having conversations with her, telling her, when it's time, you'll tell me. And she would assure me, yes, I'll tell you. And we made the hard decision that it was time. Her body just couldn't keep up anymore. But honestly, I'm so incredibly thankful for 13 and a half years, 14 years spent with this best friend, compadre, old soul. She was fantastic. Just lessons to be learned. And I am so much my life is so much richer having spent 14 years with this animal.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And feel very much similarly about the dogs that have come into my life. So
Mhm, mhm. You get it.
I think that I
Yep.
think people resonate with that a lot, especially with a rescued animal, but animals in general, I think.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Um, do you feel like there have been times when your resiliency has really been tested where you're like, I don't know if I can keep doing this kind of work, or you've thought maybe I just need to pause for a while?
Absolutely. Regularly. Yes.
Regularly.
And I can think of a number of specific instances. And I think whether those were people related, a member of our team who is really in a hard spot and trying to be strong for them and help them through it, but hitting a point where you're juggling so many things. I gotta take care of my charges. I need to take care of my team. This is a lot. And I don't know how to maintain enough of myself to provide for my own family or to get up and want to do it all again tomorrow. And of course, with animals too, there are lots of times when animals are, at the end of life, and it's really hard with a geriatric critter to feel the strain of knowing I need to make a decision soon. I need to balance my own emotional connection to this animal with an objective lens of whether it's fair to keep doing this. And some of the hardest cases have been animals that have been in treatment for a veterinary issue for a long period of time who have not made it. And God, it's so easy in those moments to latch on to that one decision that we made 2 weeks ago. And was that the right decision? And what if we had done it differently? And after a few years in the field, after a few decades in the field, um, I've found myself in a spot where I sometimes have had the privilege of coaching other teams through those kinds of moments, and I've seen them go down the same paths that I've gone down in the past, and I have just enough wisdom in this brain to recognize you're going to do that thing where you second guess every decision we've made in the last month while we were treating this animal. Don't do it. And
Mm.
here's why. And you got to figure out a way to make peace with the fact that we might never know if things would have turned out differently had we taken a slightly different path. We're never going to know that. It's never going to happen. Nobody will come in and tell you. There's no author to this story who's going to come in and tell you this is what would have happened if you had handled that decision point differently. And so there, yeah, that yes, to answer your question in short terms, there have been lots of times where I've come home at the end of the week or the end of the day and just thought about hanging it up. Um, but it helps to know that I am not alone. I'm not the only one who's wrestling with that same frustration, that same pain, that same uh, sense of wonder whether we did it the right way. There's probably an entire team of people who are all at their respective homes thinking the same thing right now because we're all kind of in this together. Um, and even if some of those folks are colleagues and peers, and I don't know them personally as well, they're very likely going through some of the same processing that I'm going through. And so for me, that has been really helpful. So if I'm not showing up for me, I'm going to show up for them. And I also know that teams show up for each other. So in the moments where I am feeling really weak, um, there's a really good chance that my team is going to help me out and carry me right now, just as I'm going to work to carry them a month from now when we have some other situation. So look for those connections. They're
Mhm.
meaningful. They mean a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you've really touched on something I was going to ask you, and maybe there's more that you want to expand on it, maybe not. But, with the amount of experience you've had, yeah, messages that you'd want to convey to others who are in this kind of rescue space, and if they're feeling the weight of the work, what message you'd want to have them hear.
Absolutely. Um, I think there's two messages. I think one of them is that it is okay to take your foot off the gas every once in a while. And we're having discussions about that here at PAWS this year, going into 2026. It's an opportunity to sort of reset and calibrate what we do. And it sounds blasphemous to say we can slow up a little bit. It's hard to do that. It's hard to say that. If you had the largest facility in the world and money were no object and you have tons of staff and you filled that facility with animals in need, I can guarantee you that there would still be animals out there in need. And I hate to say that because it sounds cynical. It's not meant to be cynical. It's meant to be practical.
Mhm.
Um, Practically speaking, there will always be a need for us to do more. And as arbitrary and as painful as it might be, sometimes the choice is to either keep doing what we're doing and do more of it and know that we're going to drive ourselves into the ground doing it, or take a conscious beat and take our foot off the gas for just a little bit in order to be able to recalibrate and ask ourselves, are we doing all of it the right way? Is it as efficient as it could be? Are there changes we want to make to the way we're doing things? And then you can put your foot back on the gas again after you've calibrated. But if you keep moving the same speed at the same pace forever and ever, you never get the opportunity to really ask yourself, am I moving in the right direction? Am I doing this the right way? And so I think for all of us in conservation, in rescue, in education, in all of these different realms, it is important sometimes to move as far as you can, as fast as you can, but also the flip side, the shadow of that is there are going to be times when you should absolutely coast for a little bit and regroup with your team and figure out if we're really doing it the right way, because you cannot do that on the fly.
Mhm.
And the second piece of advice ties kind of into the first. Um, Creating space to think, creating space to actually pause and think. Again, we're all hardwired to hit the ground running, to roll up our sleeves, to get the work done. If you are putting out fires all day long, if you are playing whack-a-mole where there's just constantly another task to get done, uh, it's really hard to ratchet back and move back to 10,000 feet to think big picture about the specific tasks I'm doing, about how I'm doing them, about whether they're effective, measure the work I'm doing against metrics, set some goals, without sometimes blocking out time on our calendar to just process and think. It is so easy to get lost in the tasks And another 10-hour day has gone by. I've put out fires all day long. I'm going to go home. I'm tired. I need to recuperate. I never take the break to think or to debrief or to talk to my team about whether or not that process is the way we want to keep doing it. And so I see so many teams across animal care spectra who just hit the ground running at 7 a.m. and they don't stop until 6 p.m. and then they go home, go to bed, eat some food, and come back tomorrow and do it all again. And then time goes by, and sometimes we look back and realize we didn't help as many animals as we wanted, or that method that we've been adopting or that we've been using for years isn't actually the best practice anymore. Or I've just experienced 20% turnover in my team because everybody's exhausted. And if we had only made this one operational change, we might have been able to give some of those people the break they needed, and maybe they wouldn't have burned out.
Yeah.
But we don't give ourselves the grace to think. So
Yeah.
so if you got to build it into your calendar, do it. Block out the time. It's worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think being able to probably discern between what is truly emergent and important versus what we feel like is urgent and important. So it's like, yeah, the constant putting out fires.
Mhm.
There's a part of us that gets fueled by that, right? It feels like we are important and needed, which is it's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the same time, yeah, being able to pause and think about and organize and like what absolutely needs my attention right now, and where can I adjust a little bit and create some perspective.
Yeah. I'm going to throw in one more if
Yeah,
you'll let me.
please.
And one more third piece. And that is to find the balance between your instincts and
Mm,
science or objective truth. Because that's another thing that I think in the rescue realm is sometimes challenging. If I live entirely in a scientific headspace and I am extremely clinical and I'm approaching every problem clinically, I risk mm, I risk missing out on some really good instincts.
mm,
There is a science and an art to life with animals. And if we are living entirely on the scientific side, we miss out on all of the instinct-driven, sensitive sort of notions that we have. But conversely, if I live entirely in an impulsive sort of instinct-driven space, and I'm just always doing what feels right without thinking about whether or not the result is what I'm really after, I risk sometimes, doing more damage than I intended because I'm not paying attention to developmental milestones in my animal, to behavioral markers, to other metrics that mean something. So, within a team or within an individual, I guess that's the last piece of advice I'd give from a resiliency standpoint is find a way to balance those two things out. Because if you're not finding that balance between scientific, objective, measurable truth and instinct-driven, sensitive notions, we sometimes are not sustainable in our efforts, or we're not really going to make the impact we want to have.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. In the therapeutic space, we call that middle ground wise mind, right? That wisdom of marrying both parts of us. So
Absolutely.
appreciate you saying that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So you guys are making big impacts. You are touching a lot of lives, both animal and human. So thank you for that.
Thank
Uh,
you.
if people are listening and they really feel compelled by the work that you're doing and they want to help,
Mhm.
how can they support the work at PAWS?
Yeah, we're very proud of the work and the impact that we make, but we are always welcoming of support for in whatever form that takes. Our website is a great resource, so www.paws.org. For folks that are local in the Seattle metropolitan area, if you are interested in volunteering, we're always looking for volunteers, whether that's event-based as a one-off volunteer, whether that's coming out to the companion animal shelter and helping us care for dogs and cats. Sometimes those shifts just literally mean walking dogs for a couple of hours, and that alone is helpful. And we also use an incredible volunteer team out at our wildlife facility as well. So we've got a lot of opportunities for people to get hands-on and work side by side with our professional teams to provide care for animals. If folks are not specifically looking for a way to volunteer, or if you don't live in the Seattle area, our website also gives plenty of opportunities for you to get engaged with our teams in support, whether that's financial or picking some items off a wish list to send to the animals themselves. We are proud stewards, and it's important to us that we are good stewards to donations. So as far as nonprofits go, we have a great score on Charity Navigator because we make sure that the resources that come in, the funds that come in, are used to great effect to directly impact the lives of animals. And so there are ways to donate through the website. But I know a lot of people out there, rather than writing a check, would rather pick a specific item and play Santa, which is totally legit, and that's great. So we have some wish lists on our website as well. So if you are, a particular fan of cats or dogs, or you really love bear cubs or baby birds, there are some tailored options on those wish lists to help out a specific animal that really resonates with you. So lots of ways to contribute, and we appreciate all of them.
Yeah, that's really, really special. And I think your website is incredible. I mean, it's got a lot of information and a lot of opportunity to learn a lot. So definitely we'll direct people there, and links will be in the show notes so people can access that easily.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, Harrison, I really appreciate your time today, and for giving so much of your experience and your compassion in this conversation. I deeply appreciate it, and it also extended out to the team that worked so hard at PAWS. So thank you so much for being a part of this conversation.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to share some stories, and I really appreciate the time.
Thank you again to Harrison Edell for sharing his story and his work with PAWS. If you are moved by this episode, like, subscribe, share it with a friend, follow us on Instagram at Animal Rescue Hub. And until next time, may we all find our own tale of resilience. Thanks for joining us on Tales of Resilience. If today's story moved you, reminded you of your own path, or gave you something to think about, please consider sharing this episode with someone else who cares. You can follow us on Instagram at zodi.paws and animal.rescuehub to stay connected, or visit zodipaws.com or animalrescuehub.org to learn more about both of these organizations. And you can also email us directly at info@animalrescuehub.org. And if you or someone you know has a story worth sharing, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, be kind to yourself and never underestimate the power of a tale and a little resilience.